Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Flawed Theology podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Suzie, and we're asking the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Flawed Theology podcast. Do you ever feel like it's like when you get to recording day, it's like sit down, you're like, oh God, I just want to sit down. And then it's kind of just relaxing to do this, but also like something else to do instead of just sitting on the couch and eating bonbons. Like,
I think it's relaxing because then I don't have to put the kids to bed.
oh, right.
I know you put the kids to bed before, but my kids are still up.
Well, my kids refuse to go to bed. So then usually for the first hour of recording, my wife is texting me and saying, they're still not asleep yet. F you and your
Damn
podcast.
you.
Well, anyway, so we're excited today to have another guest. I think we're back-to-back guesting as far as episodes go. Our guest today is Sarah Mott, and she's got a pretty cool, interesting background. She's a former preacher in the Foursquare Denomination, so I'm excited about hearing about that. And she's an author and a poet, and she's got more degrees than your average bear. So, Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Sarah is a member of our Dangerous Questions group, which is how I basically roped her into being on the show, because she's posted some real engaging, thought-provoking content lately.
Everything she posts is insightful.
Yes. So I just messaged her and I was like, hey, your stuff is really cool. Do you want to be on the podcast? And she's like, sure. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Tell us about your background and weave your faith tale in there as you see fit.
All right. I grew up Lutheran, like very, very strict Lutheran. My mom was Lutheran. I think my dad was agnostic, but he went to church with her. So we grew up in this really small Lutheran church. And I say, like, it was so strict, like, think Catholic without the kneeling.
Okay.
Were you Missouri Synod Lutheran?
I don't think so. I know I've been asked that and I never heard of it until I moved to Iowa. So, but I grew up in North Dakota, but I don't know what it was. I know now it's LCMC, but I don't know what it was before that.
You probably would have known if it was LCMS.
Yeah.
You're pretty proud of that. So you probably would have known that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. They never really, I just know they were really strict and everything was like, sing from your hymn. And then we have to I always joke with people because I'm like, hey, can you tell what I'm from? Now may the blessing of the Lord be upon you. And
And it's like
they're
a
like,
game,
oh.
that game show. It's like, guess this denomination. Like,
Yeah, they're like, oh, I know that.
oh, so you guys did like the chanty prayer when you did the
Yeah.
the back and
We
forth?
did that too.
It was chanty?
I grew up Missouri Synod Lutheran, and what you're describing sounds very similar.
Okay. Yeah. And so, I mean, and then our church kind of split off because they wanted to be more contemporary, more spirit led. It was a whole thing. So we got more into very scripted service to kind of more, upbeat music, more spiritual, but it was more interactive and, give your life to Jesus kind of thing. Holy Spirit. I'd never even heard of it, the Holy Spirit, until the church split off. And
It was still Lutheran?
yeah.
Okay, interesting. So it's like a more charismatic version of Lutheranism.
Yeah.
Do you know if you lost any congregation members during that time? Because I know like my parents would have left.
Yeah, we did. I mean, it was a whole almost war.
Okay.
The more old school type just kind of left or went to a different Lutheran church. And then we got a crap ton of new members after that. So our church went from I want to say 150 people to almost 500 after that.
Oh, wow.
That's a common tale, it seems like, in a lot of denominations. Like that happened in so many churches of mine growing up. The Baptist church would be strict fundamentalists, and then they're like, oh, let's add in a worship band. And all of a sudden, the old fuddy-duddies are like, hell no.
Yeah.
And then all the old people stop giving their money. And then the church just relents because all the young people who want the cool music have no money. And so then the church is like, all right, we're back to hymns. That didn't work.
Yeah.
So you grew up in that, were you basically born into that and that was your whole childhood? And
Yep. That was my whole childhood. And my dad was more on the spirit led stuff. My mom was still really strict Lutheran. So I was just telling my husband this last night. I'm like, you have unlocked a memory. I remember, because my mom was so strict Lutheran, like, oh, if you do this, God will be mad at you, if you whatever. And so God's always watching. And so I remember, like, when I even, like, as a child, when I would have to get dressed, I was like, well, I don't want God watching me. So I would do the whole, like, stick my hands inside my shirt, grab the next shirt, stick my arms in that one, and do the quick pullover kind of method. I was like, I don't want God seeing my body.
Right.
Wow.
Talk about like internalized shame. Like,
yeah. And that bypasses the fact that God is like, can see everything and potentially has X-ray vision, right? Could see through your clothes if he wanted to.
Right.
And plus he made your body. So he already knows what it looks like. It's like these like loopholes that you weren't thinking about them as a kid.
No,
you were just scared.
Yeah, I was. And I grew up, I mean, even to this day, I'm so self-conscious about my body. Like, I don't know. I don't like people looking at it. So, and that's, that stems from that, just being afraid that God could see my body. And so I've always been like, no, don't look at my body. Just don't.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's like, how early of an age was that that you were feeling like that?
I want to say 7.
Oof.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I know we're going to get into this later because I know purity culture is a big topic of yours, but like this is one of those things that you don't even think about outside of like the Christian circle. This idea about like being ashamed of who you are just as a human being, like, and I had that too as a kid, not to that extreme about that, but the whole thing that God was always watching, you just have this built-in fear of like everything that you do is being evaluated and scored, like it's going in a little book every time you did something that you weren't supposed to do or whatever. So,
right. And also because I didn't like attention, I never spoke well. So my teachers called my parents one day and they're like, is Sarah mute? Because I mean, the teacher would talk to me and everyone would be like, Sarah, why don't you say something? Sarah, why don't you talk? And I would just freeze. I just couldn't. So I went through a long period of that. I finally came out of my shell probably at age 18 when I had to get a job.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, were they trying to like get you evaluated like for some kind of like disorder and stuff? Like,
Yep. I've been through a lot of therapy, a lot of different counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. Like that's been a lot of my life.
Yeah. Like as a kid, and that was like mandated by your parents because of like your being inward, or was it later in life?
Well, it was in school, probably starting at the age of 12. And it went all throughout adulthood. So, I mean, I've just been in and out. Because they were always concerned because, Sarah just never says anything. She never brings stuff up. She never does, and I didn't develop mentally as a kid as much because I didn't say anything. I didn't ask questions. I didn't really learn in school. I was always, I always tell people I'm the reason for the No Child Left Behind grading on the curve. Because every time they passed me in school, it was because of the curve.
So with your family being so religious, I don't know how it was in your church, but there was kind of a sentiment in my Lutheran church that like therapy was unnecessary because God was all you needed, yada, yada. Did you come up against that when you were a kid and you needed help and you needed therapy? Was anybody in opposition to that?
I mean, that wasn't necessarily the view. The view was actually like therapy is bad. So it's evil. It's psychology. It's of the devil. So that was a lot of what I came up against was, Sarah's maybe demonically possessed because
oh goodness,
going into therapy. So
and that's not what you need to hear as a child who's struggling to gain confidence, possessed by a demon.
But then, but your parents put you in therapy with the same thing, saying that the therapy was bad because you were potentially demonically possessed, but they were going to put you in therapy anyway, even though it was bad?
My parents didn't really believe in that stuff.
Okay.
My mom was like, that's stupid.
Okay. That's good. I guess your parents had your back a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, obviously they grew up in the era that like nobody needs therapy, just suck it up and get another job. I think they were just concerned because the school was concerned and they didn't want like CPS or something on their butts. So
that's one of those like things you just don't think about how religious indoctrination affects like the whole of a person, like because that was all based because somewhat of your personality being developed by your family's religious belief. Were they like super active in the church? Like, was church your whole life as a kid, or was it just
Yes.
kind of something they did on Sundays?
No, no. We were very active. My dad was actually the president of the church for a long time. And my mom was in most of the volunteer groups. We were forced to go to church on Sundays, and my siblings didn't go as much as I did. I honestly just love church. Like from a very young age, I don't know. I guess I can't tell if I loved it because I truly believed it, or if I loved it and made myself believe it because I wanted like the attention and the approval of my parents. I was the middle child, and my parents thought I was the problem child because, I'm the one who needs all the therapy and all that. So I think, I don't know. I know that I love church, and I feel like I loved God, and I feel like, I really sought after that, but it could be, maybe I just wanted the approval of my parents.
Yeah. Well, and was there some aspect of like where church felt like a safe place at all? Like,
no. I mean, yes and no. You're accepted as long as you are eager to be there.
Right.
I knew that growing up too. If I were to be my true self, if I were to express who I actually was, they would kick me out so fast.
What do you mean by your true self?
We had this toxic positivity culture, and I was very depressed, and I don't even know how to describe my depression. It's a whole thing, but I'm a very dark person who really loves the creepy and raw things about life. And of course, I'm a writer, so I kind of embrace the sad things in life, not because I want to be sad, but I don't know. I sound so cheesy.
No, I get it.
Okay. No, that's just who I am. And I just, if I walked in there, even talking about my writing or the way that my brain works, they would be like, this girl's really creepy and weird, and she get out of here. So, a lot of putting on that positive face and being like, yeah, everything's great.
Yeah. There's not a lot of room for like creativity and like being a person that's like not within the norm of what they're trying to cookie cut, out of the church. So yeah. Was there a time like I know so this might not even be a great question for a Lutheran person, but like in Lutheranism, is there a time where you like make a decision to get saved or be a Christian, or is it just kind of something you are because of your family? I think Susie's talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious in your experience.
The core belief of Lutherans is that it depends on which side of Lutheranism you're on. Like, of course, Missouri Synod, I believe, is everybody is damned and you have to try to work at being perfect to get accepted by God. And then LCMC is basically everybody's going to heaven no matter what. So we were more on the, like, everybody's saved regardless. You just have to love God, blah, 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 blah. But when we split off and became more, charismatic, if you will, we had a couple of pastors who kind of pushed the say yes to Jesus kind of thing. But overall, it wasn't an important thing. It was just assumed that you're at church, you love Jesus, you're going to heaven.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And just to clarify, for LCMS, you had that half right. So definitely everybody is damned just for existing. Absolutely. Yeah. Poor miserable sinner is like the thing that we repeated. But they believe that you have to have faith, not works. So you don't have to be perfect. You just have to have faith.
Okay. Before we split off, that was the core belief before was, they called it, or they said that, you have to have faith, not works. But, then they quote James, works must follow that faith. And
without works, faith is dead or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Faith without works is dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always find that fascinating too. Like even within same denominations, there's even they can't agree on what the Bible there, and they're looking at the same Bible, look at the same verses, but they still can't agree on the core thing of like what it actually is to be a Christian, which kind of just lends credence to the whole idea of, well, how can either of them be right?
Yeah.
So what were some of the things that started to kind of like nag at you where you started to think that, well, maybe I don't believe this?
Yeah, because you had some ups and downs, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, the first time I hit what I would call a faith crisis was in 6th grade when we learned Greek mythology, because I was always told the Bible's the thickest book in the world, therefore it's true. And then we get Greek mythology.
Whoa.
Yeah. Then we get mythology, and I'm like, this is pretty fucking thick.
Right.
I don't know.
The Iliad and the Odyssey are pretty damn big books. Like,
Yeah. Like it scared me. So I was like 12 years old and I'm like, oh my God, what if Zeus exists?
Will Zeus see me naked?
right.
Yeah. I kind of came out of that. And then, I was very, like, once our church got more charismatic, then I was, I don't know, happy in it, I guess, following Jesus and stuff. But I think 1920 was around the time that, this is going to be a whole rabbit trail.
That's okay.
Okay. So my parents always told us all these rules and like, you can't have sex before marriage, yada, yada, yada. And then they went off on this whole thing our whole lives. Like they waited to have sex before they married each other. And so therefore it was a good example for us to follow. And I took that to heart because again, I really want the approval of my parents.
Right.
And also, I mean, as I aged and I watched all my friends like start having sex and they feel obligated to these guys, I'm like, I don't ever want to feel that. So I had a high school boyfriend and of course we teetered on the edge of deciding whether or not we're going to have sex. But I was like, oh my God, like I'm so obsessed with this guy. I can't imagine having sex with him and then adding that into the mix because I already feel like I could just die if he left me. So I don't go have sex with him and then have him leave me eventually. So I put that completely off the table. And a lot of my friends from church and we talked about how we were going to be virgins till marriage and, whatever. So around the age 19, 20, all my friends were coming back from college and we were getting together and we're like, let's go to Perkins night, and then all of a sudden my friends like start talking about like they're having sex and they're telling all these stories. And I'm like sitting there horrified because I'm like, oh, what?
What happened?
They're all like looking at me and they're like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I have not had sex. And they were like laughing at me and they're like, oh, you want to be the Virgin Mary, blah, blah, blah. So that became like my nickname. They kept calling that.
Oh, that's so mean.
Even to this day, sometimes they still call me the Virgin Mary, even though I have 3 kids, but that's.
Yeah.
But
are you still friends with them is my question.
Right.
No. Oh, no, I'm not.
Good.
They were like, you know what your problem is? You just got to get laid. I was like, oh my God. Like, I keep like having a panic attack because I'm like, oh my God, am I stupid or are they stupid? I don't know. Like, who's right? Who's wrong? Like, I feel like some type of way. So I went home and I'm like crying. So I go to tell my brother because he's like my best friend at the time. And then he starts laughing at me. He's like, yeah, like my girlfriend and I had sex a while ago. And I was like, what? And he's like, you need to stop with this. You're so immature. You're so naive. Like, why are you like this at, 19?
Oh my gosh.
I'm like, Mom and Dad said that, like I'm like, if they can do it, I can do it. Then he starts laughing even more. And he's like, then he gets really quiet and he's like, Sarah, you still really believe that? And I was like, oh my God, I'm having a Santa Claus moment,
Yeah.
So he's like, Mom and Dad have like slept with a lot of people before marriage. So I go running into my parents' room and I'm like freaking out. And at this point, I feel really stupid too, because I'm like, this is like something a 10-year-old does. I'm 19, 20.
Right.
I'm an adult. Like I'm freaking out like a child. So I go to my parents and I'm like, oh my God. And, I'm like freaking out. And then they get quiet and they're like, you need to sit down. We have some stuff to tell you. Then, of course they tell me that, yeah, like they had lied to us. They had sex with a lot of people before they were. And then I find out that my dad was actually married before my mom. And the whole way that he and my mom got together was because he was having an affair with my mom on his ex-wife.
Oh my goodness.
Nothing like a good Christian, right?
This is a huge betrayal of trust.
Yeah. So my world is just falling out of me. And not only do I feel really stupid, but I feel really betrayed. And then I'm like, well, why would you say that? And they're like, well, we just wanted you guys to keep good heads on your shoulders. And we just wanted to, make sure that you guys made good choices and all that stuff. And I'm like, but you lied, like, why couldn't you tell me? I probably still would have made the decisions that I have made, but like, why couldn't you just talk to me? So at that point, I was like, well, shit, like, if this is a lie, then I got like existential. I'm like, well, what if everybody is just lying about God because my parents lied about virginity to keep me in line. So I feel like society's lying about God to keep society in line. And I actually just completely walked away at that point for a long time. So that was the first time I deconstructed.
Wow.
That whole story was like a Lifetime movie. Like And like I grew up in that thing too, like where my parents like were big on purity culture and like wait till marriage and all that kind of stuff. And I knew that they had had sex before marriage because of when I was born, you know,
Yeah.
compared to when they got married. How did that affect you, like mentally and emotionally, finding out that whole thing? Was it, how did you respond to it, like in your own personal life?
Well, I went and had sex, but not.
I guess that makes sense. That's
Yeah.
not what I was not what I was going for at all, but that's a perfectly logical conclusion. I guess you'd be like, "Oh, well, they lied to me, and I've been waiting to do this." I mean, it's this whole thing of like putting sex on the pedestal. Like that's what happens in Christianity. It's like wait until marriage, and then they also at the same time don't educate you anything about sex, and they just think that when you get to your wedding night, you're magically going to know what you're doing. It's going to be fantastic. And that's not the fucking case. Like, so good for you for, being a normal human, even though you had to wait until you were 20 years old or whatever. Like I was past you, if you can believe that. So you said this was like kind of a first deconstruction. Did you kind of recover from that?
Yeah, it wasn't until I was 27. And I would call myself one of those angry atheists, but it was after my husband and I got married and we had our first kid. So people talk about like these God moments, and when my daughter and I would be playing in the lobby, she would pick out all these books on the bookshelf, but always bring me a Bible. Okay, mind you, she's only like a year old at this time, so she doesn't know. She just picks a random book. And so I was like, well, why do you keep bringing me this? It's like, no, let's pick another book,
Yeah.
Moving from North Dakota to Iowa and in my husband's hometown, it's very, very small, and a lot of religious folk around here. So I was working at the coffee shop at the time, and we get all the church people coming in on Sundays and stuff. And of course, everybody, when they come through the line, is always like, God bless you and all that stuff. And, asking, and they will ask you about your faith, small town. So,
yeah.
So I remember this one lady had come in and I just hated her face because she had that smile that tells you she's about to ruin your day. And of course, their group would always stay past close. And of course, they'd always have to linger by the counter and hope to rope us into their conversation about how they do ministry and stuff. And I was just like, oh my God, I hate these people. But I remember this one woman was like, oh, well, we should sit down and have coffee sometime. And I'm sitting there like, absolutely not. I don't even like your voice, But I just remember like contemplating like all the signs and things pointing to me going back to God. And so finally I was like praying and I was like, okay, God, like if you are real and like you want to like get me back in, then you're just going to have to send somebody to me to hold my hand through this process, blah, 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 blah. So next week I go into work and this lady was like, hey, do you want to have a Bible study with me? Like I just moved here from Seattle and I took that as a sign, So I got radically saved after that. And it's super embarrassing to talk about how like stupidly brainwashed I was. But I guess, again, I was still in that stage of my life where I sought approval. And I think that's what I got out of it more than anything was like the approval of this group of people. And, I didn't have very many friends growing up, and the friends I had didn't know the true me. So I got radically saved at 27, and then I went into ministry shortly thereafter.
Were your parents still in the picture at this time? Were you still looking for their approval as well?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I very much wanted their approval. So I think I was excited to tell them like, oh, I'm back at church and stuff, because they knew that I'd been atheist.
How did they take that?
When I was atheist?
Yeah.
I don't think they really cared.
What?
Wow.
No, they didn't, because my sister has always been a hardcore atheist. She was always the one that like, if she could get out of church anyway. And my sister is kind of also a difficult person. So I think I think she wore them down. So I think my parents just stopped caring.
Wow.
But I
Yeah.
guess if you believe, like, if your theology was that everybody's a Christian anyway,
Everybody goes to heaven.
yeah, they probably just believe there's no such thing as a real atheist anyway. Like, so you got, like you say, radically saved, which I guess is a grand difference from the Lutheran,
Yes.
upbringing. So how did that lead to going into ministry? I'm assuming that's when you went to like get multiple theological degrees. Is that how that happened?
Well, my degrees aren't in theology.
Oh,
I
okay.
got these like way before all this.
Oh, okay.
So I did this one-on-one Bible study with this lady. We literally spent 14 months doing this Bible study once, twice a week. And then I would go to church. And so after this 14 months, she received a prophecy from God that I was supposed to move back to North Dakota for some reason. So my husband and I talked about it. He was not happy about it. He was so mad at me, and it almost killed our marriage that first time. He had finally agreed to go with, because I wasn't letting up, because I was like, well, she received a prophecy from God. It's got to be true. It's got to be true, So as soon as we got to North Dakota, we started going to a new church plant. It was like kind of an independent, non-denominational thing. So I got in to lead the kids' men because,
You're a woman.
yeah. And then my husband just kind of was in the leadership group, and we ended up parting ways with them because they were demanding too much of us. And then after a while, they were like, well, if you're not going to be committed, you can't be in our leadership group. I was like, okay, well, that's fine. So we started going to New Song in Bismarck. And yes, I'm going to out them because I don't care. You can look it up. They've got a whole mess going on in the news right now.
Oh, goody. I love a mess in the news.
Yeah.
And now we go to Google.
Yeah, yes, but we got into New Song, and the pastor came up to my husband and was like, oh, I received a prophecy from God that you're going to be a pastor. And so we were like, cool, maybe this is the reason we came back to North Dakota. So my husband went through the seminary training, as did I. I never got licensed because I actually dropped out of it towards the end, because I think that's when I was starting to deconstruct, but whatever. But yeah, so my husband actually got licensed as a pastor. And so he started preaching and leading groups, and I went through the internship, the apprenticeship, and I started the licensing procedure. I led a lot of groups. That's where I got my biblical and theological knowledge and training, was through all of that. So yeah, that was like a whole 7-year kind of thing. But I was also preaching and writing sermons and doing pastoral care and stuff, just being in all the leadership groups and stuff.
So like when you got married, was your husband a Christian too? Like did you guys meet in the Christian realm, in the secular realm? Was he one of the fornicators, or like, how did that all come about?
Yes, he was not he was an atheist, as was I. And actually, the reason I ended up moving to Iowa is because in 2010, number one, I was just bored with my life. And two, I was trying to get out of a bad relationship. So I'm impulsive. And of course, I didn't really have a lot of close friends. I'm not very close with my parents. And so in 2010, I was like, fuck it. I threw my stuff in my car, picked a place on the map, and drove. And that's just where I ended up, was Oskaloosa, Iowa. And that's where I met my husband, who was actually running a movie theater at the time. But we met at the coffee shop there, and I didn't realize he was the theater owner. I just knew him as like the grumpy guy who came in. And of course, I'm like, well, if I can get a smile out of him, I win. I love a good challenge. So, yeah, we just kind of got to know each other that way and then started dating.
That's a really cute story.
Yeah, it's cute. So that was during your atheist phase. So you guys met as atheists. You like weren't religious at all. And then you go through this like radical salvation experience. How did he respond to that?
Oh, he did not like it one bit. We fought. I mean, we fought we fought almost to the point of separation over it. And finally I don't even remember, he just said he'd come to church one day, and then we just kept going, and that was pretty much it. Then he just got roped into ministry.
That's such a big change for him.
But did he ever like believe it? Did he say that he had some kind of salvation experience?
He literally just told me like a couple days ago when we were talking about all this that he did not believe it, and he was doing it for me, and he was trying to believe for me. He said he was actually relieved when he found out that I started deconstructing.
The poor guy.
I feel like that's similar to Stacy Grant's story, because I feel like she said something similar. They met not in Christian terms. She didn't want to date a Christian person, even though she was a Christian. And then he kind of was doing the same thing. Like, he really liked her. He loved her and was like, okay, well, I'll try to believe this stuff. And he also had the relief of like, oh, good, she doesn't believe this horseshit anymore. So, okay. So you go on to like become basically like a minister in this whole Foursquare denomination. Can you tell people a little bit about like what Foursquare is like?
I wish I remember. I know that getting saved is a big thing. They believe in you can't go to heaven unless you choose God. So you have to have this salvation moment, this moment where you cry out to God. And they believe in the baptism of the Holy Spirit.
What does the term Foursquare mean? Are there like 4 tenets?
Yeah, I actually just Googled this a little bit, but
yeah. I forget what they are, but it's like some dove and water and cross and
yeah, that's exactly what it is. The cross, it looks like it's a communion glass. Then there's a crown and a dove, and I'm sure they all stand for something.
Oh, it's very original.
Yeah, it says it's an evangelical Pentecostal Christian denomination. So that gives you kind of the whole overview right there. So how long were you involved in ministry there before cracks started to appear again?
I started preaching 2018 and doing leadership stuff in 2018. So I did that I did that for a while. So I guess it was a short period of time, because in 2019, I got this message from one of my friends because at the time, oh my God, at the time my life was literally like, read my Bible, take notes, pray, listen to worship music, listen to sermons. So one of my friends messaged me and was like, hey, since you're listening to all these different things, do you want to listen to this podcast by Alicia Childers? I was like, yeah, sure. So I start listening to it, and she's talking about the NAR movement, which is the New Apostolic Reformation movement, and how Bethel Church is in Redding, California, is part of the NAR movement. Now, Bethel Church is under the Foursquare Denomination, and it was one of our, like, I don't know what you'd call it, like our influencers or whatever. Like, if we were looking to be inspired by anything Foursquare, it was either Bethel Church in Redding, California, or the Rock Church in Anaheim, California. So she was like giving all these examples as to like how Bethel Church was just completely off the rails, and it was basically witchcraft, and it was blaspheming God, because you should not be praying with faith that God's going to give you anything. You should basically just accept that you're a sinner and accept whatever God gives you and praise him regardless. And I remember listening to it and then freaking out, because I'm like, holy shit, have I been blaspheming God this entire time I've been in this evangelical movement? And I remember like my heart's racing. Everything came to a full stop. I think that is the reason I dropped out of the licensing procedure, because I was like, holy shit, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore, because now I feel like everything I've been doing is bad and I'm going to hell, because I've been doing witchcraft and blaspheming and all this stuff.
That's crazy that they convinced you could do witchcraft without even knowing it.
Right.
Yeah.
There was no intention behind anything. You weren't trying to blaspheme, but yet this fear is so great that you couldn't help it but feel like you're going to hell for something that you didn't even try to do.
Well, and the idea that a church that is like the model church for the Christianity brand that you're doing somehow is also doing witchcraft, like intentionally, but in the name of God.
Yeah, I mean, that's what was claiming, and I'm sure, and other people who've written on this New Apostolic Reformation movement, like, I think that's the point that I hit, that I was like, my whole life, all I want to do is something right. And still, I am doing everything wrong. Am I ever going to do anything right? And I am not kidding you when I say I spent weeks like literally crying and shaking because I felt like I was wrong. I'm going to hell for something I didn't even know I was doing. And I know nothing. I'm a failure. I can't get this right. And now God probably hates me. And my world just like shattered. And that is 100% actually what started my deconstruction.
So when you heard this like podcast and stuff, did you go to like the people in your church and say like, what do you guys think about this? Like, or did you just walk away at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go to my leadership about it. I went to my core group of friends. Side note, every single one of them have left New Song now. But this is kind of what started it, because I brought it to my core group of friends and I was like, guys, I heard this last night. Tell me what you think. And one of my friends, he was looking into it and he was like, holy shit. He's like, I think I heard about this. And then suddenly he was like, yeah, I think New Song is kind of modeling that too. And now I want to get out of New Song because I don't feel okay with this. And so, yeah, like a lot of us were like, I don't know, just kind of freaked out about the whole thing. So we all kind of just slowly started leaving New Song.
So like when you did that, did you think, oh, I need to find a better church? Or you were like, fuck this, like all of this seems like bullshit?
For me, like at the time, my husband actually had gotten an offer to take over a church in Wyoming. So we were pursuing that at the time. It wasn't that I wanted to leave New Song per se. I think a lot of me just wanted to make it better. So I just thought like, well, I'm a leader in the church and I can make it better. I actually got kicked off the church planting team because I questioned authority a lot, and because I don't give a shit. I am not afraid to go and ask people, questions or confront them about certain things. And so I got kicked off the church planting team because they were not going to plant. They just weren't. And so I called them out on it. I was like, I feel like y'all just want to get paid to sit in this room and talk for an hour. I don't think you actually want to plant.
That's so different from what you describe your childhood was like, that you never talked and you never questioned.
Right. Yep. That definitely changed in adulthood.
Good for you.
Yeah, I am not the kid that I was, 100%. But yeah, they had told my husband like, hey, there's this church down in Wyoming. They want to meet you and all that stuff. So we were like, okay, well, are we going to get compensated? And they were like, well, yeah, after you guys get back, just, give us the receipts and then we'll, cut you a check. So we did that. We went down there. Turns out we did not get to meet with the pastor down there or the district pastor. They just never showed up. But we did get to talk to the pastors who had just stepped down. Kind of decided, yeah, we want to move forward with this. So we came back. And then, of course, they did not reimburse us because our pastor was like, oh, no, you were supposed to send the receipts to the district pastor. I was like, well, I thought we were going to send them to you. And he was like, no, the district pastor, because you went to his church. So I'm like, okay. So we sent them to the district pastor and he goes, I was not under the impression that I was going to like compensate anyone for this. And so we never did get compensated. It was a big ping pong game of, well, you're supposed to give it to them. No, you're supposed to give it to them. No, so anyway, but we did go to our pastor and say, yeah, we kind of want to move forward with taking over church because I thought, if I can't fix things at New Song, at least I can maybe do something good down in Wyoming when my husband takes over this church. So we asked him like, what's the process? And he was like, well, I don't know how the new process works. He's like, but the old process is you just tell the district pastor that, yeah, you're interested in taking over the church and then, just kind of move down there and then they'll reimburse you. And I'm sitting there like they didn't the last time, but okay. Right. So yeah, we made this big commitment. We even emailed the district pastor. We're like, yeah, our plan is to move at this time and we would like to move forward with taking over this church. And he was like, well, you are the only contenders. So just let me know what the date is. And then, I'll give you a call. And we're like, okay. So we let him know what the day was. We had been planning this for like 7 months. And so like by January, we emailed him and said, yeah, we are for sure. We have picked a date. It is March 17th, 2020. That's what day we plan on moving down there. So we literally spent 2 months packing up all of our stuff. All 3 of our kids, everything we own. And, we put in our notices at our jobs. We put in our notice at our apartment and we just packed up. And March 17th, 2020, we got down there. Surprise. That was the day lockdown for COVID went into effect.
I was just about to say, wasn't that like the day of COVID lockdown?
Yeah. Yes. Who knew? And I just remember listening to the radio reports the whole way. And I'm like, oh my God, like this was a really horrible day to move. Like, I feel like something bad's going to happen. So I'm like, of course, getting sick. But we get there. We told him we were going to be there at 4:00 in the afternoon. He goes, okay, I'll give you a call. Okay. So we get down there. We literally signed the lease to our apartment, our new apartment. And he finally calls. We're like, yeah, we're here. And he's like, oh, really? You really did it. You really moved. We're like, yeah. Then he kind of starts laughing and he's like, I guess I didn't think you guys took your faith that seriously. And we're like, yeah, it was really weird. He's like, I had another contender and so we're going to go with them. And
What?
yeah, I was like, really? Because you just said we were the only contenders and to call you when we got here. Like, I don't understand like what part of this was confusing. We were clear in our communication. And he's like, yeah, I guess I wasn't even considering you a serious contender anyway.
What? Do they not like have a process of like hiring a pastor and like is there not paperwork and contracts and like it's a big formal process in most churches.
Yeah.
Like you have to go and you have to get voted on, the church votes on you, you get called by the church. There's a bunch of stuff that has to happen.
They must have had like somebody pop up that they decided they wanted to give it to, like maybe the president's cousin or something.
Right.
Something must have happened behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, we heard it was one of his friends.
Oh.
To this day, I don't know how it works because they did not explain it to us. So I don't know. The whole thing was really confusing.
Wow.
And I don't know who dropped the ball on the communication. Like, was it me? Was it them? But I feel like I've gone through all the emails and we said, I mean, we were clear and we'd even asked like, how does this work? And they were like, well, you just say yes. And then they'll kind of just walk you through how it goes. I don't know. It was very
That's
confusing.
crazy.
It was unclear. I'll tell you that much.
Well, so I guess looking back, it's probably a good thing that you didn't get it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, isn't it better that you weren't a minister of a church?
Yes.
Especially during COVID, where
Yeah.
then right after they're like, hey, good, no one can go to church. And oh, by the way, we probably can't pay you anymore. So,
Yep.
all right. So now you've got a U-Haul and 3 kids and an apartment in freaking Wyoming,
And no job, right?
which has 17 people in it, like I would imagine in the town that you're moved to. Like,
Yep.
what did you do from there? Like, did you just go back or did you like, well, we're in Wyoming now. Well, let's find jobs and
Side story, we did try to go to our apartment and it was trashed and had bugs. So
perfect.
Yep. So we stayed at a hotel. And so we spent the entire night trying to decide what we were going to do. And we had messaged our pastor and told him the story. And his only response was, well, I'll pray for you.
And meanwhile, your kids are like, what the hell is going on, mom? Like,
yeah, it was really hard because my son, my middle son, who is my rainbow baby, and I am super protective of him, and he's very emotional. He comes up to me and he's crying and he goes, when can I go back to my room? I miss my room. And I'm like, oh my God, like my mommy had heard. Oh my God, that was the day. Like my husband was like, well, do you want to go back to Bismarck? Let's just go back to Bismarck. And I was like, absolutely not. I hate Bismarck. I escaped for a reason. I just want to go back to Iowa. And he did not want to go back to Iowa because he hates his hometown for the same reason I hate mine. So again, it was a big argument. And he had called his mom and she said, well, ever since your dad died, I need help with the house. So we moved in with her for a little bit. So we just we took whatever was left in our savings. We just moved back to Iowa.
like, was this basically the straw that was like, okay, we're out? Or like, because it doesn't sound like you had any cracks in your like belief system at that point because you were ready to commit to leading a church. Like, how did you get from, okay, that church fucked us over to deconstructing completely?
I feel like it just happened over time when we got back here to Iowa because I was like, I believe that God exists, but I don't think I believe anything else at this point. I'm going to have to build it back. And then after a while, I was like, I'm too tired to build it back. Then I just started listening to biblical podcasts, but like not, for the truth, but just like, how the Bible was put together, how decisions were made and all that stuff. And that's kind of where I started deconstructing. Like a lot of this could just be lore that they like just slapped into the Bible and put God instead of Zeus or something. and then just I went back through and I read through the Apocrypha and like all the books that were taken out of the Bible and stuff. And I was like, well, the Bible can't be inerrant because this shit isn't in there. So, or it was at one point and it's not anymore. So then I started listening to stuff like Data Over Dogma, just, to kind of process through things. And then I found your podcast and I was like, oh my God, people who are going through the same stuff.
Oh, cool.
That's cool. So yours was like, I mean, it's common amongst a lot of people. It's just kind of like a death by a thousand cuts. Like it's this like slippery slope that you're like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. And then at some point was there like a last straw where you're like, I just don't believe any of this anymore? Or was it just kind of like, you kind of just eased into this feeling of like, I don't need this anymore?
I think that I eased into it, but I do remember like after a while of being out of it, because it was a process of getting out of it, because it was just a process of accepting certain things about myself or my beliefs or my views or whatever. But I do remember finally getting to this point after easing out of it, being like, well, holy shit, I don't believe in any of it anymore. And I just like completely felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, and then I still haven't told my parents because I already told them I was atheist once and then got saved. And now I just don't want to have that conversation again. I mean, I don't think they would care, but I just don't think it's necessary at this point.
Yeah, I get it. So you started out Christian, then you went atheist, then you went back to Christian, and now you're atheist. My next question is, do you ever see yourself in any way going back to Christianity?
No way. No way. Absolutely. I will never step foot in a church again. I am very comfortable not believing in God. There's no way they could sucker me back into it.
Okay. You've seen too much, basically. You've seen the academic side of it. Yeah. That's how I feel too. Like there's really nothing that could make me go back.
Yeah, you've seen behind the curtain. So now it's like,
yeah.
Well, and especially if you were in ministry too. Like if you were in ministry and then walked away, I feel like it's another level of deconversion because you've been the puppet master. Like you've pulled the strings of manipulation. You've done all the things. You've sat in the boardrooms and the elder meetings and the planning meetings and the budget shit. And you see all that stuff. And when you see all that stuff, that's stuff that you can't unsee. You can't unlearn it. You can't unthink it because you know how it works behind the scenes. It's not what happens on Sunday morning on the big screen and what you put online.
That's exactly it. Like as soon as I got out of ministry and then realized I didn't believe anymore, like now there's just no way. I could never believe again. Even if I wanted to, it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah. A lot of people like to think that we chose to do this, which on some level there's a choice like to kind of start questioning. But I think when you get to the point of deconversion, that is not a choice. It's like, it's literally, I don't have the ability to do this anymore. Like I can't, like you said, even if I wanted to. What do you think is some of the most like damaging aspects of religion and faith systems in general? Like for you personally, what do you think damaged you the most?
Feeling like I couldn't be independent, like I can't make decisions on my own. Feeling like I am not the knowledgeable one. I am not the one with a good heart. Like learning to have to be codependent on either some higher being or your pastor or your core group of other religious friends who are going to hold you accountable. Basically, like you cannot be independent. Much like you said, a pastor has to be voted on, by the congregation. I feel like your decisions have to be voted on, in your group of Christian friends. You have to go to them and say, with everything, I've decided to blah, blah, blah. And then they all have to vote on whether or not they decide, that's a good thing. You can't just go thing. And then you have to like be held accountable. So I think that is the most damaging, is feeling like you can't trust your own decisions.
Yeah, there's definitely that like lack of autonomy. Anything you do, even if you didn't go to anyone, well, you still have to pray to God about it and then wait for some kind of nebulous response to get confirmation of what you're asking instead of just making the damn decision yourself and, based on the data that you have at hand. Like, do you think that there's anything that you miss about Christianity?
No, I don't miss any.
I love that short nope.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I have a question. I think I saw a cross tattoo on your finger.
Oh.
Is that true? That's unfortunate.
I know.
It's upside down though now, so I mean, you must
Well,
be a
yeah.
Satanist, so.
Okay. So one of our favorite things to learn about was covenant, and not just from the aspect of religion, but back in the day, they didn't have wedding rings. And forming a covenant was more than just marriage. Like if you're a farmer and people keep stealing your stuff, then you want to make a covenant with a group of warriors so that you can call them in anytime somebody comes and pillages. So we really loved that. So, and of course, I'm bad with jewelry. I hardly wear any. So when I was an atheist, I did not want to get married. That was not, my husband and I went round and round and round on the marriage topic. And actually the reason we decided to get married was because we were toying with the idea of religion. So I don't know. And I always just hated the idea of wearing a wedding ring. It felt so like, I don't know, like I'm somebody's, but I've always been, the president of the church's daughter, or Pam Miller's daughter, or Stephanie's sister, or Brett's sister. I've never been my own person. So I did not want to be somebody's wife or fiance. I did not want that to be my identity. So I hated the idea of wearing a ring. So anyway, when we got into this covenant study, we decided if we were ever going to do anything, we would do the cut on the finger of what it would look like, and then we just put the cross there underneath.
Okay.
Otherwise, because I just cannot wear rings, and I don't know. I hate the idea.
So now when you look at it, do you still look at it in a favorable light? Because like that was you kind of like your wedding tattoo? Or when you look at it, does it just remind you of religion and how you used to be in it?
No, I think anymore, as stupid as it sounds, I just kind of look at it and like, that's pretty badass. I don't know.
Okay, cool. I love how you've embraced that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's cool to be able to look at something and like kind of assign your own meaning to it of covenant and commitment, even though the cross is a religious symbol or whatever, you can kind of look at it and have your own meaning for it and know that that's yours and not just because it's some religious symbol. Other people can interpret however they want and fuck them,
No, that is really cool.
So what's some advice that you might have like for people who are questioning? I mean, we have like kind of a broad range of people who listen to the podcast, so like we always like to ask people, what are some thoughts of advice or encouragement that you might have for people who are in the questioning process?
Definitely, I would say listen to podcasts, do study, but also trust your decisions, trust the decisions that you make. Just be okay with the fact that you're not going to have the answers. Be okay with your theology being wrong. Be okay with the fact that you're going to come up against, things that you thought were true that are not. Just kind of embrace it, accept it, try to find some sort of comfort with it,
Yeah, there's something to be said for being just comfortable with questioning and not looking for easy answers. So that's definitely really good advice. So we hadn't really talked about this yet, and I guess you've been a writer and stuff kind of for a bunch of your life. So how has that been affected by your deconstruction, deconversion? Tell us a little bit about your writing and like your poetry and books and all that kind of fun stuff.
Oh, yeah. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a poet and a writer. I remember being like 5 years old and hearing The Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel and thinking, and it gave me like I don't know what the feeling was, but I still get it when I hear it. And I just remember thinking, I want to do that. I want to write words like that. I want to write things that make people feel like that. And everybody just thought that I was so like dark and sad. Like even my mom would read my poetry and be like, why can't you just write anything happy? I'm like, because it's boring. That's a lot of what I could not bring to the church as a kid, because people were like, you have like this dark side, whatever, or it's so depressing. Like God doesn't want us depressed. He wants us happy, So I hid my writing and the fact that I was a writer for a very long time. And then when I became atheist the first time, that's where my writing truly exploded. And then I remember thinking, I want to publish my stuff. I want to publish my stuff so bad. So I ended up publishing one thing, and that's The Short Tale of a Happy Trail. And shortly after I published it is when I went into ministry. And then I remember regretting it and trying to hide it. I didn't want anyone to see it because I was like, what if people from church read that and they're like, oh, she's not a true Christian because she wrote something like this. And so I vowed to never publish anything ever again. then of course my mentor, the lady I spent 14 months doing a Bible study with, she was always like, well, God gave you this talent to write, and maybe you should just, decide not to write anything ever again until you can write something that glorifies God. And I tried. I really, really tried to write stuff that might talk about my faith or my relationship with Jesus or something that would glorify. I could not do it without it sounding rough or raw or brash or something. And so I gave up writing altogether for a very, very, very long time. And then finally, when I decided I just didn't believe anymore, is when I was like, okay, you know what? I got to fucking publish this stuff. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And now I don't give a shit what people think of me. So, so then I went on to publish, I think I've got 2 poetry books out there. I've got a third one that's going to be released soon. I've been holding off because I can't decide how I want to format it. But, so my poetry books are all of my writing from the time I was like, I think 7 years old, maybe on. Like I got a hotel room one weekend by myself. I took all my writing from over the years and I went through every single one of them. That's a lot of writing. Putting together all my writing and getting it typed up onto my computer and deciding how I was going to format it and publish it. So that is the result of my poetry books, which is the collected poetry. I think, what is it called now? I don't even remember. Collected poetry of
The Girl in the Corner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it on Amazon right now. Well, it sounds like your writing, especially the publishing aspect, is like a direct result of the advice that you gave of like, being yourself and like finally connecting with who you were. So yeah, we'll definitely post the link to your stuff because I think you have a short story too, and then you have the book of poetry. So that's really cool. How can people find you? Do you do much social media stuff? I know you had like some TikTok stuff. Was that more about your books or is that about deconstruction? How's that and what is it?
My TikTok, which is author Sarah Miller Mott, and it started out with me promoting my books. And then as I got into like deconstruction and everything, I was like, okay, I have some stuff to say. So it turned into mostly just my rants and my deconstruction process. So that's what's on my TikTok.
That sounds fun though.
That's a great platform for that too. So you can just kind of stream of consciousness, say whatever the fuck you want, and people will resonate with it. So cool. Yeah, we'll definitely post those in our show notes and stuff. It's been really cool to talk to you, a lot to hear your story. Do you have any other pressing thoughts, any passionate issues that you want to get a quick rant in about? Or
no, because my brain's not even like on that level right now. But I mean, if you do go to my TikTok, you can see my rants on being in ministry and what people think of deconstruction. I know Elisa Childers put out a book, and I actually sat and read it.
That must have been painful.
Right.
It was so painful because she just assumes that people deconstruct because they just want to serve themselves.
Yeah.
You saying God is the truth is only valid if God exists. Your whole book is only valid if God exists. So you can sit there and say all this shit about why we left the church. But the thing is your arguments for all this stuff is only true. It's only valid if God exists, and your book does not address that, and nobody can address that because nobody has any proof.
Right.
So Alyssa Childers is the one in our deconstruction episode that I read a quote from, well, I kind of like paraphrased a video that she had put out about why people deconstruct, and she was blaming it all on demonic influences, and people are led by demons and stuff to deconstruct.
That's what she thinks.
That's
everything
the kind of person she is. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder how she would feel about knowing that her podcast about Bethel is basically what caused you to deconstruct. So she must be a demon, like clearly.
I thought about that. I have so thought about that because I was like, because she was like, yeah, we just have to be careful so that, we have to follow the truth so that nobody will stumble. I'm like, you followed the truth. I stumbled.
Right. Maybe we should tag her in our episode so she listens to it. And that'd be really funny. Like,
oh, that so funny. It's like, well, guess what, Elisa? You followed what you consider truth, and I stumbled. What you gonna do now?
Right. It's your fault.
You read it wrong.
Yeah.
You listened to it wrong.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we will definitely spread the word about your poetry stuff and your TikTok, and we'll let you know when the episode comes out, and you can share it wherever you want. Send it to your parents; they'll be glad to hear all the sex stories and stuff. You know,
Oh yeah,
it'd be great. You know,
So mad.
that's awesome.
we still need their approval.
Yeah.
Ew. I know.
I do too.
Well, Sarah, thanks again for being here. It was awesome to talk to you, and
Yes, thank you, Sarah.
appreciate you being here.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Flawed Theology podcast. I'm Phil.
And I'm Susie. Tune in next time where we will continue to tackle the question, if your theology were wrong, wouldn't you want to know?
Be sure to join us on our Facebook group, Dangerous Questions, and follow us at flawedtheologypodcast.com. Subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Rate and review the podcast on Google, Spotify, Apple. Those reviews are really cool, and we like to hear from them. So until next time, keep asking the dangerous questions.
See you next time.
So yeah, I'm not really sure, but
What is that?
what?
Did you see that?
Yeah, thumbs up just went over Susie's video. That was really weird.
It must be a sign.
It's a sign.
It's a sign from God. Whatever you're saying, he likes it.
It was a great point.